You don't have another guy to wrestle with for 10 years.
Cool.
Bruh.
Before you get upset, green face in 2022. I know. But it's funny. So She-Hulk just finished, and Red Hulk and I watched every episode as it came out. And oh boy, it was just average. Also, I want to say sorry for the glare that's going to be on my glasses through this video. I missed my window for the good lighting. So we have this now. Now, if you're attentive, and by attentive I mean you checked the timestamp for this video before you clicked on it, it's kind of lengthy for a review, but that's because there's a lot that kind of needs to be talked about, or at least I think so. F you, I live in a vacuum, this is my YouTube channel, I'll talk about what I want to. But I'm gonna do my best to segment it so you can only watch the review, you can skip the spoiler section, you don't need to watch this first part if you don't want to, just skip to that. Firstly though, we're gonna talk about the controversy that this show endured, if you can even call it that. Most of it came after the first episode aired because of one line that Jen had. After becoming a rage-filled beast, Bruce tries to explain to Jen that she needs to be able to control her anger, or else society will only see her as a rage-filled beast. And now that I think about it, this plotline is actually the only thing in this show that comes full circle. But the reason this scene is considerably more cringe than it is based is because this line doesn't really make a lot of sense. Bruce just basically tells Jen to keep her shit together, but her reaction to that is, I do this all the time, I'm a woman. She explains how being a woman is constantly hiding her anger, getting demeaned and called by men, and while I'm not going to say that this doesn't happen, we can all agree that this happens to women. But in the context of this show, it makes no sense. And that's what's really important for this entire first episode, the context. Once again, we can all agree that this shit happens to women. Whether or not you're a woman, we're aware that it happens. But in the first episode of this show, it doesn't happen. She gets kinda catcalled by some guys after she becomes a Hulk, so I'll give the show that. But one of the things she also references is a lack of respect that she gets at work, but that doesn't happen, as she's competent and she's well respected and shown in a positive work environment. But the biggest offense of this entire scene is really similar to this show's problem as a whole, in that she doesn't know her target audience. Now, I'll get into what I mean by that in the regular review section, so hold on to your tinfoil hats for now. But we can all mutually agree that her lecturing the Hulk on anger management is about as effective as bleaching a black t-shirt in an attempt to make it darker. Banner has been struggling with anger management for 10 plus years. So yeah, no shit, he's gonna try and comfort her and tell her that she has to be very careful with these powers she's been granted. Hold on, let me see if I can get some more light in here.
Transition.
Did I do it? Did I do it right? That all being said, I think that all happened in an attempt to get her some early wins and maybe some sympathy, but it comes off as lazy writing, and I'm pretty sure that both men and women, and the gender in-betweens of this audience, would agree that this was not really the way to handle it, as it comes off as quick and forced. They easily could have had this be fixed by having her coworkers disregard or disrespect her, and show the things that she says happen to her in the monologue that she gives to Bruce. Rather than have her coworkers praise her for her work, just replace it with some issues in her workplace, and I think the scene would work out a lot better. I mean, there is a male coworker that butts into her room at one point, but he's literally harmless. Just make that character an asshole, and honestly, your script would be fine. The two last bits of Twitter drama that this show caused. One, the Megan Thee Stallion twerking scene. I don't know why this was as big of a problem as it was. It happened in an end credit scene, it's funny if you turn your brain off, and it literally doesn't affect the story at all. It's funny. And two, there's a line where Jen says, I can't even exist without being a derivative of the Hulk. And while this is supposed to be a thing about how she's a woman, that doesn't really make sense. She quite literally is a derivative of the Hulk. Like, quite literally, he was there first. You exist because of his blood deriving its way into your bloodstream. Like, she can't just be Hulk because Hulk isn't a mantle. Not to mention Hulk is currently still alive. There's some other cringe lines in the show, but I'm not gonna go over them all because I don't want to come off as one of those assholes who dislike the show because She-Hulk's a woman and not because She-Hulk just isn't that great of a TV show. The show also garnered some conversation by being very cameo heavy, almost to the point of being cameo dependent, significantly more than any other MCU show. But that also ties into the not knowing its target audience bit that I mentioned earlier. So without further ado, let's get into the review section of this bitch. When the show was being teased and promoted, there were cameos in pretty much every trailer. And minor spoiler, but not really because once again, they're in the trailer. But those cameos were Wong, who appears in 3 episodes, Daredevil, who appears in 2 episodes, and Hulk, who appears in 3 episodes. It should be noted that all the characters have a short cameo in the last episode, but other than that, they all have large influence on the plot for the respective episodes that they appear in. The problem is that they're using these long-standing MCU characters, or in Matt Murdock's case, MCU characters, to drive engagement, which makes me feel like they don't have nearly as much confidence in this series as they act like they do. There are multiple jokes in this show about how it's She-Hulk's show. Oh yeah, Jen breaks the fourth wall in this show. Not a spoiler, it's also in the trailer, just saying for context of this bit. But the joke is only relevant because the writers are consciously aware of the fact that lots of people wouldn't stick around for this show if our Lord and Savior Daredevil didn't have his cameo until episode 8. They knew what they were doing. And I said this before, but this is pretty new for the MCU shows. Some of them have 1 or 2 minor cameos that last an episode or 2, but there's one in almost every episode. I think the only exceptions are episode 5, 6, and 7. And sorry, I need to kick this dead horse one more time because it really needs to learn its fucking lesson. But to finally round out that target audience bit, this show really doesn't know it. This show is funny. I think it's really funny at times. It's a sitcom, for better or worse. It has a lot of The Office meta-commentary style humor, but it does throw a lot of jokes out, and not all of them stick. Let's be real for a second, the MCU's fans are probably like 80% male or more, and probably somewhere in their 20s like me, or 30s and above. This show is clearly targeted toward older women, at least in its humor, and for the credit to Marvel and Disney, thumbs up. I'm pretty sure that's one of their least touched demographics with the MCU, and I'm glad they're making something in the MCU that will appeal to them, honestly. But the problem is, this show is built on the backs of 3 other established franchises, making it not only confusing, but overwhelming to newcomers. And this, to be fair, is a problem with the larger MCU as a whole. Getting in on the ground floor in the MCU is practically impossible nowadays. However, once again, I'm basing this off of She-Hulk as a show itself, not the MCU as a whole, or rather, its part in the MCU as a whole. So we've now addressed the fact that this show targets 2 vastly different audiences. Long-standing MCU fans who are 20 to 30-year-old men and older women, probably 30s and upward. But the problem is, I don't really know if it succeeds at holding the attention of either of those audience, and I can say for a fact that the men of this show really probably didn't stick around for it, especially the long-standing MCU fans. I think that does once again come into the fact that they make a lot of jokes at the detriment of men, especially in like the first half of this series. You're allowed to make fun of men, men are allowed to make fun of women, but it has to be tasteful and it has to be reasonable. They just kind of do it because they can sometimes. The jokes are good, really only about 45% of them stick. And to be fair, I'm a Rick and Morty fan.
I'm Pickle Rick!
I constantly laugh at the show, so maybe I'm part of the problem, but 45% is lower than my grade in AP US history, so I don't know. But enough about women's wrongs. It's time we talk about women's rights. Once again, at times, this show can be really funny. It had some good episodes and some bad. Episode 8 is probably the best in every category: humor, directing, characters, action. But episode 7 is just so bland. It's mostly shot reverse shot camera angles, nothing really happens that already isn't established or inferred, and it's just really boring. This show has a really bad problem with licensed music. In the finale, there's probably the worst, most atrociously used licensed music I've probably seen in any piece of media ever. And yes, this is coming from someone who's seen the 2016 Suicide Squad in theaters. But the show's original soundtrack is actually pretty good. It's preppy, intriguing, engaging. I found myself humming along to it a bit, but some of the music selections in this show are pretty much unforgivable, and I'm pretty sure it's the 8th deadly sin. I probably should have mentioned this a lot earlier too, but this show looks like it was filmed on a PS3. The CGI is pretty weak. It looks better in low light, but not by much. Her movement is stiff, and a lot of the time she just looks off. It's really odd. Her clothes especially, for some reason, I just feel like they're gonna glitch through her body, or their physics are just gonna fuck up and glitch all around the place. That being said, it's certainly serviceable, but it's not excusable. This is a problem that's been going on in the MCU for a while now, largely in Thor Love and Thunder and parts of Doctor Strange. I think there was also some bad CGI in Spider-Man No Way Home, but that came out a while ago, I hardly remember it. What's worse is there's even a fourth wall breaking line in this show where they make fun of the fact that the VFX team is too busy to do the CGI. Like, that's not funny. They just looked the problem in the eyes and said, fuck you. Honestly, it's really just shitting on the VFX artists at that point. Something the show does do really well, once again, is its characters. I don't really know if I hated any of them outside of the ones you're supposed to hate. Jen is really sweet and funny, and even as a 20-year-old dude, I found it pretty relatable. And by relatable, I mean I would say real after she says some shit that I thought was pretty based. There's a character who appears in episode 3 or 4 of this show with Wong, and at first she's really annoying, and then she's really lovable, and I have no idea how the writers pulled that off, but she became one of my favorites by the end of the series. Jen's friends are probably the funniest people in this show, and they're personified actually really well. They have definable traits and attributes that I really love about them, and they also just come off as really good friends to each other, not just Jen. Although this show does have a problem with characters like cutting in at tense moments and being like, well, that was awkward, and then just going about their day. And I'm aware that this is a problem with the MCU as a whole, but once again, we're in our She-Hulk time-space void. This is the only thing that exists right now. But the characters in the show outside of Jen do get zero development, so that's kind of a shame. You know, when I turn on my MCU property, I like to see some action happen. It's a comic book superhero, so I think that's fair. But you can count the number of fight scenes on the show in one hand, and count the number of punches She-Hulk actually throws on the other. The action in this show is so unbelievably underwhelming. I think in the one episode Daredevil is in, he does more than She-Hulk does in the entire show in terms of action. And last thing before we get to the spoiler section, but this show's plot is terrible. Don't let anybody tell you, oh, it's a sitcom, it doesn't matter. Yes, it's a sitcom, but the show still has an overarching plot and still matters regardless of what genre you think the show is. It made a commitment to telling an engaging story, and it really falls short. This show picks up and puts down its plot more than a recovering alcoholic picks up and puts down its bottle. There are episodes where the plot doesn't move at all for whatever reason, and the story is just so disjointed. Episodes 7 and 8 had nothing to do with the main story at all, so I figured episode 9, the season finale, was just going to be setting up for season 2. But nope, they resolved every plotline in the least satisfying way possible. It was funny, there were some amazing jokes and bits in the finale, but objectively speaking, and if you're a fan of the show, I really want you to think about this, was this actually a good ending? With all of the stuff they set up, not much of it actually gets covered. If you haven't seen this show, I implore you to think about this when you're watching it. Think about where the plot starts, how many plot lines there are, and where it ends. They could have made the plot better. There's at least an hour and a half of filler in this show. I was really just left wondering, was this the best way to close the book they opened? The story is set up to be great, but it really falls flat. The ride there isn't so terrible, a few bland episodes, a couple of good ones, and one great one, but overall the plot and story are just not great for this show. Okay kids, if you haven't seen the show, either fucking leave or skip to the timestamp on the screen now. Red Hulk, would you please count us down? Okay, I'm skipping straight to the fucking ending. What the fuck was the finale? What happened to Josh? Like, he fucked She-Hulk. He was just mentioned in episode 9 passingly, but they never addressed what they actually happened to him. Like, dog, he slept with her, took her blood, and presumably some other fluids, and dipped, and it was never brought up again. This is even worse when the show wants to have this Jen is so clever moment when she wraps up all her plot lines, but forgets the guy who literally fucked her. But the scene with Kevin is kind of a little more confusing. This show is the MCU's introduction to fourth wall breaks, and up until this moment, they were harmless. She just talked to the camera. But here she literally displays universe level power and changes fucking time itself. Let's not forget, Hulk was in space and came back for the finale that never happened, and she just sends him back like a traumatized kid going through rebirthing therapy. They act like this is some hilarious finale because it's not like other MCU CGI slapfests. But this was almost worse because nothing f***ing happens. She just says, I don't want this ending, change it, and then they change it. All this time wasted setting up interesting stories, and they go absolutely nowhere. The main villain of the show being incels is funny as a one-off meta humor joke, because people in the real world hate She-Hulk for being a woman. But Jesus, they really beat the dead horse with it. Like, they even made this fake website, Intelligentsia, which is pretty much the MCU's version of Reddit. But it's like, we could have had The Thinker. We could have had The Abomination be good. But speaking of which, they ruined Emil's character. I don't care how long that nigga has been in prison. Why the f*** is he like this? He was such a good character in Hulk. Okay, well maybe he wasn't a good character in Hulk, but at least he was grounded. So this feels kind of like a slap in the face, to be honest. It's like one of the MCU-ification of the character things. I feel like it's the jump from The Dark World to Love and Thunder personified. Again, I mean. I really think that's it for the spoiler section. It's just the finale was so bad, I needed to rant about it in a separate spot. It was funny. The finale was funny. Some of the banter was generally good, like the bit where she mentions, I fucked Matt Murdock. Fantastic. Good for you, Jen. But as far as plot and story goes, it was just an unsatisfying ending. But now we're gonna join up with the losers who haven't seen She-Hulk yet. So, in recap, here we have a show that doesn't know its audience, has bad CGI, has bad action and sparse action, has a bad plot, probably the worst MCU finale ever, but it's kind of funny at times and has good characters. Yeah, 5 out of 10 for the critic score. I know that seems kind of high, and it probably is, but it really wasn't that bad. It succeeded at what it tried to be. It was a legal comedy, and I'll give it credit for that. But for the fun score, I'm really only going to be able to give it a 5.5 out of 10. It's got a lot of content, and not all of it's good. Of all the episodes of the show, I'd watch like 2 of them ever again. But on the first watch through, it's pretty okay. And I do need to say this, but this is also a problem with the MCU shows. Once again, it's not affecting my rating. However, this is something that's been similar with MCU shows before, where they have a ton of filler and the show ends up suffering because of it. But unlike some of the other MCU shows, I have no desire to go back to watch this at all. I'd rewatch the entirety of Moon Knight and maybe like the first 6 episodes of WandaVision again, but I don't really see myself ever coming back to a full watch through of this show. She-Hulk is certainly entertaining, but at the end of the day, it's disappointing and underwhelming. I'm looking forward to whatever she's gonna be in next, but I'm not really sure she deserved a whole 4.5 hours of mediocre content. To be honest, I really hope we don't get a season 2, unless they fix a lot of the problems I mentioned here. Anyway, I'm gonna go wash this off now. Anyway, I'm gonna go do like Michael Jackson did and bleach my skin. See you guys next week. Oh, holy shit, it actually doesn't come off.